Welcome to a new episode of the Creative Industry Insight podcast. I'm your host, Bobby. Today, we welcome editor Parker Laramie, who joins us to talk about their work on Train Dreams. Parker will talk us through the emotional beats of the movie and how we use them to push the narrative forward. Please be warned there are heavy spoilers in this episode. Now let's jump into the conversation with Parker. Hi Parker, thank you for joining me today.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to
Yeah,
be here.
we're here to talk about Train Dreams, which has come out recently on Netflix. How have you found the reception to the film?
All I keep hearing is everyone says they walk out of the theater bawling, crying. So I think that means we did something right, hopefully.
Well, yeah, because for me, like I I enjoyed the film. It's beautiful. Some parts absolutely destroyed me, um, and I kind of didn't want it to end. It was,
Hmm.
sometimes when you watch a film, um, sometimes you can really feel its length, and other times it just brisk past, and you think, how was that only an hour and 45? Was it?
Hmm.
In no way could that feel like that way.
Yeah, I mean it's funny. I can't take full credit for it because I think the book plays that way as well, the novella. It feels sort of completely expansive, covers a huge amount of ground. Um, and yet you can read the novella in almost the exact same amount of time as it takes to watch the film. It takes like an hour or two to read. So there's something about, I guess, Robert Grenier or something that um, sort of takes you through this long, decades-long journey, and yet you cover a lot of ground, and yet it zips right by. I suppose there's a lot of people that feel that way about their lives as well when they get older.
Um,
As
yeah, probably, which is kind of scary as well because you have those moments where I was just talking to a friend today and talking about like one of the first lunches that we had, and it was like 10 years ago for his 40th birthday, and now he's recently turned
Mhm.
50,
Yeah,
um, which is crazy.
yeah.
It was like, wow,
I find myself more and more every day being like, oh yeah, that was like 15 years ago. Oh wow. So yeah, time flies, I suppose.
yeah, and also I think with like a film like this where you start in like a certain period and it progresses and you kind of see like the technology moving along with what's happening and how they need loggers for a war, and then it's like actually we need to build it for a bridge so we can cut time out, and then so on and so forth. And then there's moments where you have a flash forward and Robert's looking out the window of a train of like where he is on the bridge, but then actually you look on the other bridge is for cars, and that must be such a weird thing as like a character to experience, but then also to sort of go through as well of how quickly technology changes. I feel like at the moment we're not like that 100% like they were then, but we're still sort of
Mhm.
experiencing some change.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the reason why the pace of the film sort of works in a lot of ways is, and feeding off of the script that Clinton Gregg wrote, and then I think the performance that Joel gave, there is this feeling of sort of looking back on one's life, on Robert's life, Robert looking back on his own life. And that's the thread that holds it all together. A lot of people have asked sort of how did you handle passing through time like that, how and questions about transitions. I think transitions are hard both in life and in editing. And I think when transitions work, there's something emotionally that takes you through. There's an emotional thread that you're following and that you're pulling. Um, those flash forwards. I don't know. I think Robert Grenier, when he looks both at the bridge he had just helped to build and then the bridge that's built to replace it entirely, decades later, I think he looks on it with the same sort of wonder or it's not wonder or awe. I don't think he's impressed by it. I think he's more befuddled or something, you know. But there's a continuity there, and you can use that to sort of sail through time. And I think that's part of the reason that was whenever we were doing that, I think that's when it felt like it was seamless and um and things were flowing.
Yeah, and I think as well, like you're mentioning about putting on emotional threads, and there's a number of them in the film itself. As an editor, I guess it builds on intuition about which emotional thread you want to pull on. But are there certain things that you want to focus more on, or do you sort of just play it out a bit more and then cut it down so that you can sort of not compress, but make sure that you can have everything that you need to tell the story?
I think it's a bit of a push and a pull. Like, um, I think I sort of prefer when I'm faced with something that isn't working, whether it's a scene or a full section of a film or the entire film. I sort of like to pick something and then grab the pieces that I prefer to sort of build rather than whittle, I find. Uh, Particularly when I'm working in nonfiction, I think that's probably why I work that way, is because if you were to whittle, it would take forever. If you truly worked with everything you have to have sort of an intention and a goal and a line that you're choosing to follow before you can start deciding what is going to make the film. And but then there are other times, I don't know, particularly the project I'm on now, I think it's a bit more of a whittling process. And you sort of look, sometimes you look at something and you'll sort of be like, "Oh, I think this is working." We're just trimming fat, and we're sharpening and we're sort of it generally works, but then you just keep chipping away. You swap out one performance, you add one cutaway, and suddenly the whole thing sort of shifts before your very eyes. And so it depends. And there were times in Train Dreams when, particularly in the back half, I would say, sort of after the big disaster that happens in the middle of the film, we really had to sit down and go, okay, like what is it that's pulling Robert forward now? Um, because what's beautiful about the film, but also made it quite challenging, was there wasn't anything pushing him forward. It wasn't exactly clear what we were driving at anymore. Um, he was always, for the first half, you're just driving at, I got to get back home. I got to get back home. And that's really easy to ride. I don't know. When you've suffered the kind of profound loss that I think he suffers in the halfway through the film, you have to ask yourself, like, what are you living for? What are you driving at? I think Joel did a beautiful job of figuring that out in his performance, and it was up to us to sort of navigate through what he had given us and I don't know, make sure that we weren't distracting from that. I think there were a lot of opportunities to sort of get lost over here, get lost over there. And in some ways, it doesn't change, I guess. I think that was eventually what we decided, which is a bit odd. Doesn't totally make sense, but I think at the end of the day, it was still he's still trying to get back to what he had before somehow, emotionally, in some sort of emotional stable place. I think that's sort of I hope that answers your question, I guess.
Yeah, it does, and I think it's because you do have that first half before the tragedy of like what is pushing him along, and then I think in the second half is like what is he trying to chase back
Right.
again? And I think you have those moments. So like when he's talking to the older logger and he doesn't recognize him until he mentions a name, and then mentions it's William H. Macy's character's name, and then he asks him like, "Oh, how is he these days?" rather than actually realizing that he passed away. And I think that's a sort of probably a moment as a character and as a um, actor that you kind of think, well, we need to change the direction of like what my focus is and what I want to do, um, and move on with my life in a way. Um, but it's also very, I don't know, maybe it's just also like the realization of like getting older and how certain people's memories work and
Hmm.
how can you play with that as well.
Hmm.
But then also it's like the snapshots in the life, and I think there's one scene that plays out, which I think can be looked at as slight for laughs, but then also like shows the sort of brutality of life then. And that's when somebody comes for Apostle Frank and he basically runs because the jig is up, and gets shot and killed. And then the person who's done it has said, "Oh, does anybody object? No, okay, cool. That's it. You all have a good day." That sort of scene that could be really played for laughs, but it's also you just see like the brutality of what life is like. And if you cross the wrong person, then you know you're in big trouble.
Hmm.
But that's also just another snapshot in the life. But then also when it came to, it feels like parts of the film as well, when it comes to editing, is that you have those really luscious um, uh, scenery of when they're out in the woods, and it I don't think I've ever seen green so green before, and also with the sunlight. But then when you're going back to the home life, that has the magical element of the being shot at magic hour, and um,
Hmm.
there's like two different worlds. When it came to editing and also playing around with like the colors on it, what was the thinking behind that, and how did you want to sort of go about showing those worlds?
I mean, it was interesting. I mean, one of the things that's nice about working with Adolfo's footage is that it does visually all and color palette wise, it cuts together quite smoothly. He likes to stay in a similar register across the film. I had cut Clint's first movie, which Adolfo also shot, Jockey, which similarly is it's sort of all. It seems like they're living in a perpetual magic hour. So, the sun is perpetually setting. And it's good. It gives you a lot of flexibility. One of the things that Clint and I love to do in the edit is to play around with structure a lot, but both on that sort of explicit level of sort of these flashes backward and forward in time, and also in general, sort of rearranging, I think we messed a bit with, particularly in the back half, sort of when Claire comes into his life and all of these sorts of things. And similarly in Jockey, and sort of you can sort of get away with things in that way. But there was also, I think, in Train Dreams, one of the things that was interesting about blending the visual worlds was everything is shot very wide. There's a lot of open space, particularly in the sky, and a lot of like beautiful compositions, but unconventional. And it was interesting. It was actually a bit of a challenge for me as an editor because you can't fall back on your instincts as much and sort of what comes naturally to you. You have to sort of you have to think of it more as a series of stills in some cases that you're putting together, and it almost works more as a cerebral sort of photo essay than a seamless cinematic flow in a lot of places. I mean, I think eventually we found a way to make it feel that way as well, but compared to a lot of the other stuff that I've cut, I think it has its own visual language that is sort of deliberately yeah, still and photographic as opposed to cinematographic. So, I mean, the juxtapositions were nice to play with, I think. And then certainly Adolfo does a lot. I'm sure you talked to him about this, but he does a lot of color work. And, we were working with essentially what was raw that came out of his camera. But what he does with his colorist, Sergio Pasqualino, I'm probably mispronouncing that, but brilliant colorist. Takes the film to a whole new level. You were talking about the bright trees and things like that. Clint really wanted it to look like a postcard. And it was mind-blowing when I saw them do the color at the end because I had no idea that they would pull so much more detail out of the sky. And there was just so much more going on in every frame all of a sudden, once it went through color. So it was really a spectacular thing to see.
You know when something like that happens where you get to see more detail, and does that change the way you might think of how a scene might flow? Or are you at the point where you're happy with the scene and you kind of let them finish what they're doing and then that's it, it goes to the picture lock?
No, absolutely. It changed a lot of things. We were actually really lucky. We were able to keep cutting after we had done. We cut a little bit after it premiered at Sundance. We ended up not changing as much as we expected to. But we were sort of rushed at the end, so we didn't quite get to finish everything we wanted to do. And uh so so we were able to, and not only with color, but we were also able to be getting, rough sound passes from our sound designer Lee Salavan, and the score from Bryce Desner was also coming in as we were still cutting. So there were a lot of cases where we were starting to get that finishing material before we'd locked picture, and we were able to dance with what they were doing, and we didn't have to sort of lock everything off and go, okay, now we're done. Whatever it is that they choose to do is sort of, it was more like, okay, here's as close as we've come so far. What do you want to bring to it? And then we could react, and go back and forth and really make it all of a whole. And I think the film, I don't know, when you get to cut like that, I think the film has a cohesiveness that you just don't achieve otherwise. And it can be more stressful. It's a lot more complicated to work that way, but it's very rewarding. You get something that is really, really, really special, and every single frame and every single sample of sound is fine, perfectly calibrated and finely tuned with all the other elements. It's really great.
I think as well, like if you have those moments, those sort of times where it you can go back to edit and cut it with sound added, a score as well, that you probably see it, feel it, and see it in a different way. I should probably say hear it because you'll you probably have one perception of the scene, but then once you have that score come in, you think actually we could probably hold on to this shot an extra couple of seconds, or we can maybe cut it down a bit more and let something else play out, or how can we tell this part of the story and what can it mean? Like for example, like the dream sequences, um, those could probably be played out in a way that's like makes it more magical and mystical, but really I think with the train it kind of it feels like whenever you have a dream, when you have a dream of when you're falling and then you shudder yourself awake, that's the sort of
Mhm.
feeling that I got from watching those dream sequences and
Mhm.
what they meant to Robert at the time.
Yeah, that feeling you get sometimes as you're falling asleep, where you're literally falling and you sort of wake yourself back up. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and to speak of the dream sequences too, one of the most fun things I think we got to do was, I don't know if you noticed, but the flashbacks are slightly different. It looks like it's the same moment, but we actually are able to use like a different take. So like for example, when we flash back to Gladys hunting and sh firing the shotgun, when it happens in real time, It was they did it twice. They sh fired a real shotgun. They did it twice, and we used one take because the timing of it was all right. But the other take we loved because she gave him this smile when she sort of hit her target, I suppose. And that's the one that we use when we flash back because the pace of the scene was all different. But we got to sort of have both in a lot of cases. And you're playing with sort of the fallibility of memory, I suppose, or the unreliability of memory, where as he's remembering back to that moment, he might, sort of project a look onto her face that she didn't actually give him at the time. And that feels a little sweeter. And it's so subtle, I don't think it really registers, particularly on a first watch. I don't think you would ever notice it, but I think it evokes a different feeling, and especially in that moment, I think it really motivates his sort of breakdown that he has in that moment. Um, yeah.
Yeah, and I think as well, like you're mentioning how um you can play with memories and how you can actually restructure somebody's thoughts. And in a way, you can manipulate a bit of it, but obviously, and play around a bit more and probably have a little bit more creative freedom as an editor because, as you said, you can use different takes. And it feels like, as well, like you're not wasting what was captured on that day. And I guess as a director as well, when you have that idea and when you have that idea as well and you merge them together, you, you get like the best of both worlds, so you don't feel like you wasted anything.
Hmm. Right. Yeah, it's sort of using all the pieces of the cow to sort of, like make a sausage. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
yeah, definitely. And also because I think when you're doing flashbacks like that, you have to be really careful because in general, when you repeat an exact shot, it sort of, I don't know, it flips off your attention, I think. You sort of it feels like the movie's doing too much work for you somehow if you're just playing back the exact moment to sort of remind someone of something expositionally or even to like evoke a feeling. It feels like spoon feeding, I think, unless you're able to play with it, I think, hopefully, in the way that we did. I think it registers a little bit differently, hopefully.
Yeah, and I think as well because I think you mentioned about like as an audience member you could switch off because in a way you're in your mind if you not haven't been paying attention. For example, if you just look at your phone moment and you watch back up, you might think, "Am I watching the same scene again?" As
Hmm.
something not necessarily happened. And actually it's not, it's just another scene of a flashback. And I think as well it could be that's just the way that this film weaves it in and plays around with it really. Um, I think that's really sort of like important part of it as well. Having that mixture of real life and um, dream dream sequences. What I'm also curious to know about as an editor is that in films or TV shows you have points of views and you kind of cut between people's point of view. But here we're mainly with Roberts throughout the whole time.
Yeah.
Um, how does that affect your editing that you're just within a point of view of one person rather than different characters throughout the film? Does it make you feel that you need to think about how scenes play out a bit differently, or do you just go with it and sort of trust your intuition?
I mean, I think whenever I'm cutting out, I'm cutting by feel or sort of trusting my intuition. But I also do find that it's helpful to intellectualize decisions, and to not just uh, purely cut by instinct. Um, and subjectivity, I think, is something that um, a lot of the films that I work on inherently have, but that it is also something that I think I'm drawn to naturally, and for me it's like a I guess it kind of goes back to that sort of emotional thread that carries us through transitions and carries us through time. I find it easier to sort of get into the, you know, get on the rails, as it were, uh, with a film emotionally if I can say, oh, this scene is from this person's perspective, or, for the whole first half of this scene, we're really telling it from her perspective, and then all of a sudden we're going to switch to his kind of thing. This one I think is I think both of Clint's films that I've cut for him have been pretty subjective. Train Dreams is actually I mean we talked about it as we were cutting it, the presence of the narrator I think complicates that a little bit. I think the there to sort of the narrator is maybe inside Robert's head in a way, but we're looking at everything from the narrator's perspective. I'm not sure if we're actually looking at everything from Robert's perspective. Um, Whereas in Clint's film, it was very much everything was from Jackson's perspective, the main character. It was very deliberately a subjective experience, first person. But this one, and it's interesting because it does feel like we're inside his head. It does feel like we're, experiencing the dreams with him, but it's still I think it's still sort of an omniscient narration that's happening, both literally and visually.
And do you find with like the narrator that it did that make it easier to sort of push the story along a bit more because it's like internalizing certain thoughts and feelings, but or does it sort of complicate it a bit more because you're sort of explaining to the audience, so rather than showing, you're telling them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. Like, as soon as you start to do it, yeah, I mean, you're opening up a can of worms. You are sort of, it's very much like a flashback. It's like you're telling the audience exactly what you want them to feel. And there are ways to sort of mitigate that as you start to do it, I think. Um, and I think there's some places where we did that, and maybe sometimes some places where we were a little bit too forward, or where we just decided, fuck it, we're going to tell people how we want them to feel, or we're going to give them this whole expositional backstory of Robert's life. And I don't know, I think it's tricky. There was definitely a version of the film where there was time early on when I was advocating for throwing a lot of narration in there. And unfortunately, in the first edit or two, I had cast myself as the narrator, which made it very easy to be like, oh, well, we can just write anything, put it in there, and, explain the whole movie away. And so I think, we overloaded it. And what we really did was we brought back a lot of stuff from the book. The Dennis Johnson language is so delicious that, you know, there was a very specific texture that was there. But then we realized that the movie had its own texture and it had its own language, and that there were specific things that we could use, but we couldn't use all of it. And Clint did an excellent job, I think, too, of making it feel a bit more universal. I think Dennis Johnson was deliberately sort of taking on the language of the time and making it feel more of the time. And Clint was very deliberate from the get-go of making sure that everything signaled clearly what time we were in, but that it was a bit timeless and it wasn't like an aggressively period piece. Let me know. There's a very noisy gardening going on right outside. Let me know if that's too loud.
Oh, I
Um,
can't hear anything, so I wouldn't worry about it.
okay, great. I'll let the noise canceling do its work.
It's all good, don't worry.
So yeah, I think you have to be really, really careful with a narrator. I think if the narrator is doing something, then it needs to be something that you're not getting from anywhere else in the film. It has to be something that we're not getting from however Adolfo shot it. We're not getting it from the score that Bryce has put under it. It's adding something so that all three of those things are working together, but they're not redundant. That I think is when it's firing on all cylinders and when it's truly working. Um, and yeah.
Yes, and I think as well part of it where you can do when if you do the narration yourself, you can kind of play around with like different styles of what you want to do. I can imagine it could be like a very deep voice, or if you wanted to do like a or the pacing of how someone's narrating it as well.
Mhm.
If you had like a faster pace, you can then probably change the way that you cut. Or if it's a slower pace, then you can let the scene play out a bit more. I think you could probably have a lot of fun with it as well if you wanted to have like a spare few minutes, do it in like a really high pitched voice, like Mickey Mouse or something.
Mhm.
Um, let's see how that would work out, which would be quite funny, but then also probably a bit of a waste of time because you don't want to time his money in film and TV.
Yeah, very true.
Uh,
Yeah, I mean, I think fortunately, well, first of all, I'm not I'm not a voice actor. So it was very easy to be like, okay, I'm just gonna like play it totally straight. And Will Patton comes in at the end and brings his own thing to it. And he has some a warmth and a resonance to his voice. But there was something, I think Clint did sort of decide early on, like just he did want the narration to sound pretty straight. He didn't want it to be terribly colored. And so that made it a little bit easier for us to do. There were a couple times when he would record something, um, and like, and it was tough. Even he couldn't sort of hold himself back. And I guess there was something about me just being like, I'm not even trying to act. I'm just going to read this. But I was also able to sort of give it a pacing, I think there was something about the pace of the edit that I was also able to find by like recording new material and, you know, uh, finding a rhythm. I think the rhythm maybe I was able to bring to the table a little bit in that, or at least use a rough version, the same way you sort of use temp music when you're cutting, um, to find a rhythm to something, and then you can take it out and you can put anything else in there, but the cut already has its own internal rhythm that then everything else is sort of playing off of.
yeah, and again as well with because you want to, I just want to sort of go back to before when you talk about language and how Clint sort of changed it a bit more. Were there ever times when you're editing and I wouldn't say you're like confused by the language, but the use of language can be sometimes sort of a bit like, did I hear that correctly? Or how can
Mm.
I insert something like this into the story without it confusing the audience?
No, there was, I mean, well, actually, I will admit a lot of like Arn People's lines, particularly the brilliant accent that William H. Macy brings to that character. There were a lot of those lines that I didn't understand. I watched it a dozen times before I actually understood what the hell he was saying. Uh, and fortunately, it's not so much about what he's saying as it is the again like the rhythm of it. It's like it's musical. It's lyrics to a song that or it's a poem, and it has a meaning that's beyond exactly what he's talking about, or understanding every single word. If you understand every third word, you get it. I mean, he's like shirking responsibility and yet claiming that he's, the most important person out there. So Uh, Occasionally, sure, there were times, I suppose, with that, but for the most part, especially in the book, I found, I don't know, I found the language to be, beautifully circuitous and yet very poignant and very like um, concise, and that's contradictory. That's sort of doesn't make a whole lot of sense as I say it, but there's something about all of that that sort of lands, I think. Um, Saying something in 12 words that you could easily say in three or four, and yet I don't know, it's clearer and it's sort of and it still feels very tight.
Yeah, and again, I think with language it's just a funny thing because of how people speak or just how different times are. So, like, even if you read Shakespeare, for example, sometimes you'd be looking at that and you probably have to you'll read it a
Yeah,
number of times because you're like,
because the
huh?
dude got paid by the word, right?
No, probably the letter, let's be honest. That's why some of them are so long.
Yeah.
Um, but even when you're saying watching like William H. Macy, who when he has the way that his accent and cadence and the way that he speaks and how yeah, sometimes you kind of it's gonna sound really bad, but it's like, what are you talking about, old man? Like, what's going on? Like,
Hmm.
should we be listening to you? Are you just being in a certain weird mood because you're still logging at this sort of age, and then do we pay attention? And then actually, you realize that yeah, he's quite important, and I think it feels like he's like a surrogate of like what you might see in the future.
Hmm.
It's like the ghost of like Christmas future or something like that, and you're like, well.
Sure. This is who Robert will be one day.
Yeah, and before yeah, before he knows it, and yeah, we actually it's great to see how Robert looks like in the future as well, and just how the makeup design and everything looks on him as well. Yeah, it looks
Mm.
incredible. Must
Yeah, they
feel
did a
weird.
really beautiful job. Very subtle aging on him. It was really, really well done.
It must feel kind of weird as an actor to see yourself like in the future. It's like, is this how I'm really gonna look like? I hope I do.
I know. Yeah. I asked Clint, or I think we talked about that at one point, and Clint did mention that Joel's wife, I think he took a selfie of himself that day, and his wife sent it to his wife, and his wife was like, I do not like this at all.
Oh, mate, it's not what you want to hear from your wife. But
I think he was coming from a place not of like, oh, you don't look good anymore. I think it was more like, I'm not really interested in skipping ahead a bunch of decades right now. I'd like to live in the moment.
I
Um,
like my Joel to be kept as my Joel and a
yeah,
handsome,
yeah,
rugged
yeah,
man,
yeah,
not
yeah,
not the older gentleman.
yeah.
Um, there's I've got a couple more questions left. I think what there's moments as well where you're cutting between sort of the story, but then also these beautiful scenes of like the camera being mounted on um the trees and also at one point on a plane. And these are really like beautiful captured moments of sort of life in a way, and in a way, weird way, they must there's a juxtaposition probably in the way that they're being shown as like this is how life is. How do you go about inserting those sort of moments into the film and let them sort of play in and let them flow with the story?
I mean, it's interesting that the shot of the tree, the camera being strapped to the tree, I think is a great example of, I mean, and I didn't actually learn this until a couple of weeks ago when Adolfo and I were at a screening and someone asked him a question about that. But as scripted, the opening of the film was very different. And that shot of the camera strapped to the tree was intended to be used very differently. It was sort of intended to be as part of a series of these very still sort of tableaus that were the memories of his life, of Robert's life. And for a variety of reasons, that wasn't where we landed by the time we got done recutting the opening of the film. But I think at the end of the day, we still use that shot sort of in the same way, which was it was a portal from whatever the prologue of the film is into the main body of the film, if you will. I guess we're still sort of in prologue mode there, but there is a sort of the film opens with this like very poetic, the narrator sort of not speaking about Robert at all, speaking about his own feelings about the world almost, which used to be towards the end of the film. It used to be in the middle of Robert being in the airplane and sort of everything coming together for him. But it we found that it didn't totally work there. I found it totally didn't work there because it is a completely different language from the rest of the film. The narrator is speaking almost as first person rather than what he's seeing Robert doing. And so, I mean, we left it there for a really long time, but it kept sort of feeling like this itch that I couldn't scratch of like, this is like something's not quite right. And I think we had built what you see in the film now as being this like very expositional beginning of the film of sort of running us through Robert's life, which is wonderful and super helpful and really brings you into Robert's world. But it just felt so, we would show it to people and people would be like, I get that you have a lot of stuff that you have to tell me at the beginning, but I'm just like not ready. Like I want to be able to sort of sink into the film a little bit. And so I think eventually we had taken those initial that initial the part that's in the beginning of the film, we had taken it out of the end, and it was just sort of sitting there, and we were all really depressed that it had been cut from the film because we all really loved it, but it just like wasn't fitting, and you're just kind of like, you got to kill your darlings. And then it suddenly was like, wait a minute, what if we use that as the beginning? And and it was nice because I think it was a return to the original, a bit of the original intention that Adolfo had had in sort of having opening the film with a series of tableaus and then using the tree as a way of like, slingshotting you into the movie almost. And uh and so yeah, it was sort of an elegant way of reappropriating the original intention behind something and yeah, it is sort of jarring and it's very like it's very self-conscious, I think, when you see a shot and you can tell that the camera's been strapped to a tree. Like you find yourself thinking about the camera and the way that it's been shot. You're not quite as immersed into the film, but I don't know. I feel like there was a way of using that, and I think we kind of did that sort of you're able to sort of let yourself sink into the film and like that shot takes you into it in a way. So yeah. I don't know. With the camera strapped to the plane at the end, I don't know. That was sort of, I mean, that plane sequence is sort of its own thing. I don't know. That feels much more like it flows pretty seamlessly with the flow of the rest of the film, I think. I think by that point you are accustomed to the fact that the film is playing a series of tableaus for you. There are a lot of long takes that are just wide shots, where half the frame is sky and a lot of negative space and so that all I don't know, that all felt very much of a piece and sort of fit very well. And in a way it made it easier. A lot of the flashes and things are sort of these big giant tableaus, which I don't know. As an editor, I found challenging because when you have a very short shot, you want it to sort of be a close up, or I felt this desire to have this like unity of form of like, oh, if the shot is super short, then it should be a super short close up. I found one of the things as an editor is like you're always thinking about, okay, where am I trying to get the eye to go? And it never felt, and when you have these wide, expansive shots and but you're trying to do it in 12 frames, you kind of ask yourself like am I able to control where the eye is really going to go? And I don't know, somehow you're able to do it. I think the shot before it, sort of wherever your eye is in that shot, will then transfer over to the next one, and you sort of you dance with it and you keep rearranging it until you find it, kind of thing.
And again, it's like interesting to hear in terms of just the way that the tree falling down, how it's sort of one idea, then actually once you get into the edit, you want to sort of try and do it something differently with it. And I, I guess it's also like you're being dropped into the situation and into this world and the sort of danger of it because you just feel the full force of this tree falling, especially like in the woods where these trees are massive. And I guess like every day, if you live in like in a city or something, um, you wouldn't really experience that or feel the full force of it.
Hmm.
And then with like the plane as well, I feel like that's just another way of like you're being flown out of this world in a different way, because you're experiencing it with Robert probably thinking, what on earth is this contraption? And then being up there in the air and seeing everything so high up is probably so different to what he was used to when he was going up a tree, for example.
Hmm.
I wonder what that experience must be like being on the plane, during those times as well and going up there.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, I sort of remember the first time I was in a plane, or like, the earliest memory I have of being in a plane, I guess would be something like that. I don't know. I still think it's a bit of a boggles the mind a bit when I look out a plane window. I'm not sure if I actually feel like I'm that high up. It all sort of seems like some sort of miniature that I'm looking at or something.
Yeah, especially when you look at the cars, it literally feels like you're looking at miniatures
Yeah.
um of like a film, for example, just how they're moving. You just like in my mind are just thinking like, as you said, this is not doesn't feel real. Like no way. And then just to hit you up with my final question, what was your favorite scene to edit?
Mm. That's funny. I feel like I should have this already in mind. Uh, I don't know. I think probably the opening was my favorite scene to edit. It was really challenging, and it went through a lot of iterations, and there were times when it was not very fun to cut, but once we found it and we landed where we landed, I realized that it had been a lot of fun to cut. And I think partially because it was so constructed in the edit, and it was something where Clint and I were pulling shots that they had shot for, with completely different intentions behind them. The scene with the guy drinking from the boot was a whole other, it was its own scene. It was like 5 minutes long, and we cut from the film, and then we just used that one image. Or or the stuff Adolfo shot of the smoke crossing over Joel's face, and that's the stuff that is the most exciting, the stuff that you're just like finding as you stumble through things. And then, as I mentioned, that scene that we had pulled from the later in the film that ended up being at the top. And then the narration as well, like some of that narration was in the original script, and then some of it was pulled from the book as we were cutting and we were trying to find the movie and put people pull people into the film and put them exactly where we needed them in order to then take them off. I worked with a director once who said that like the best opening to a film is one where you can go anywhere. Like you establish something, and then from there, it's like, okay, now you can just live in this world for the next however many hours. And yeah, I mean, the thing that they had scripted was beautiful and really elegant. I think, also like all of that stuff with the cabin, with the plant man and stuff, a lot of that was originally in the opening of the film. But yeah, I don't know. We just found that we needed we needed to be in a different space once we got into the visual world. And so yeah, so that was probably the most fun. It's always fun to like find something as you're working, and especially when you're working with someone like Clint, who's like excited about that as well. Possibilities are gonna still open up. It's sort of a new draft of the script for him. So
There's Interesting choices, but then also I think you kind of get put on the spot a little bit with like being asked what your favorite is because it's probably like picking your favorite child or and sort of going from there and picking what was probably the best scene. And there's probably scenes where it were probably absolute, as you said, mentioned, a nightmare to cut, but then also at the same time, once you've managed to do it, it probably worked out quite nicely. But then also there's
Hmm.
probably other scenes that just felt like a joy to cut and you didn't have to worry about it whatsoever.
Hmm.
Parker, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Train
Thank
Dreams is
you.
streaming now on Netflix. Go out and watch Parker and his team's beautiful work. Thank you again.
Thanks so much.
You take care and bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.